Welcome to the Becoming Sound podcast, where we dive into the tough stuff and try to find the humor in the hot mess of being an adult child. Join me as we peel back the layers on growing up in dysfunction, navigating substance abuse, mental health challenges, and everything in between. Hello, today my guest is Dr. Brian Licuanan, a board-certified psychologist with almost 20 years experience working with a wide range of psychiatric conditions, and a specialized focus on insomnia and family crisis interventions. So welcome, Dr. Brian.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Good to be here.
It is awesome to have you. I just wanted you to tell my audience a little bit more about what you do and what specifically led you to wanting to work in the addiction arena. I know it's a very complex topic, but what led you to that?
Well, it was more of a circumstance of chance originally. And it was when I was looking for what we call postdoctoral hours. When I was pursuing my PhD, we have to get a certain number of hours for our board licensing. And so I joined up with a psychiatrist here in Southern California. And a month into my postdoctoral internship with him, he said, "Hey, I'm opening up a treatment center for males and females struggling with mental health and or substance addiction. Do you want to come on board?" And I was like, absolutely yes. And that's where I dove into the arena of substance addiction and highly acute mental health conditions, and was able to facilitate groups, individual therapies, working with families. And so it was a really, really good nosedive, so to speak, of getting my hand and feet wet in this arena. I had worked with all these populations with mental health, varying levels of acuity and substance addiction in my other trainings, but this was a really, really great deep dive into it, where that was the population. And I think a lot of my skill sets and insights and knowledges that I use to this day came from working in that arena.
Yeah. And you know what? We need so many more people that do this work. It seems to be an all-time high epidemic of substance use disorders, mental health conditions. I mean, you name it, right? It's not going anywhere. It's not going away anytime soon. So thank you for the work that you do. I want to talk a little bit about childhood and adolescent trauma and how that growing up in a dysfunctional environment and a dysfunctional family, it could be addiction, could be mental health disorders, could be abuse, that type of thing. How does that affect us as we mature into adulthood? I speak from experience, as I come from an alcoholic family, and it's multifaceted. But how does that translate specifically when we get into adulthood or into our later teens? And there is there's a big area where the patterns are repeated. You know, people who suffer childhood dysfunction and growing up in that environment, it seems to be a recurring thing that we are repeating the same patterns. So just talk a little bit about that.
Well, very important topic, first and foremost, that you mentioned that. And it's been an inquiry with me on many levels, whether it be on interviews that I have and with family members. And one of my biggest beliefs, and this is based on the hundreds of individuals and family dynamics that I've worked with, is when people come in to see me for some type of chronic mental health condition or substance abuse issue, what I find is that 90% or more of the people who I work with, their struggles, if we can trace it back to where it started or the etiology of those struggles occurred due to some event or events in what I call a sensitive period in one's life, and that's childhood and adolescence of meaning our teen years, is because I believe a lot of things are going on during that time of life where we're very impressionable, vulnerable, don't have life skills or internal resources or infrastructures to deal with such things as traumas. And so it, I believe it's calling and imprinting can take place. And if someone is not able to navigate through that, whether it be help, finding healthier coping mechanisms, those patterns definitely can repeat itself. And so definitely considered a high risk factor when someone
Mm-hmm.
experiencing some level of trauma or significant distress in one's life. And that can come in many forms. That can come in the form of a disconnected family household where a parent's not available, substance abuse household, of course, trauma or abuse, neglect, a lot of distress and inconsistency taking place, unhealthy bonds. This it is the spectrum could be there, and of course things like bullying
Mm-hmm.
and very very tumultuous divorces, and a lot of those cases where they can have a long lasting impact. And so yes, so I do find a lot of childhood or adolescent trauma has a significant correlation to people who are struggling long term.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that it's so important that we talk about it and
Mhm.
we break the chains of secrecy and keep this stuff hidden. And a lot of families do because they're full of shame. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of those type of emotions that go along with living
Right.
in a household like this. And so it remains a silent disease. And often, what goes on behind closed doors is how it stays. And I think talking about it and bringing it into awareness is just so key in breaking those chains. And that brings me to your wonderful book that I
Mm,
read. As you can see, it's
that looks familiar.
yeah, I had to tag a whole bunch of pages, and I'm pretty sure there's a yellow highlighter throughout the whole book. Um, I picked up your book after finding you online, and I have to say, when you read a lot of self-help and clinical style books, I thought, well, I'll just read through the book and but when I started to read it, it's not clinical at all. In fact, it is very easy to understand. I love how it was written and how you broke down the 25 must knows that you have. It's so easy to understand and it's in common language that anyone can pick this book up if they have a need and read through it and get some concrete takeaways, some concrete information that will help you navigate your way through if your loved one is going through substance use disorder, or even if you are, or even a child. A 12-year-old could pick this up and get some key points out of it and help them to navigate through some of the tough emotions that come up. Um, One of the things I loved about this too was your explanation on tough love
Mm,
versus what you call assertive love. And that was a real eye opener for me in how to the big difference and how
mhm,
our thought processes are so mute. It's just we have these blinders on and we're used
mhm.
to stereotypes. And so this was a great tool for me to break down how to look at something differently. So can you explain a little bit about what you call assertive love?
Sort of love. Yes, if I may talk about something real briefly before
Yeah.
that you had mentioned was about how it's not a clinical book, and that was very very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Is one thing I did not want was this very heavily jargon book where a lot of terminologies and statistics in there. I really wanted to be a easy to read guide, and that
Mm-hmm.
exactly right. Someone 12 years old or preteen or what have you can pick it up because they may have a struggling loved one, parent, cousin, relative, and to be able to pick it up and be able to comprehend what my messages was there. And so that's very validating for you to say that it
Mm-hmm.
was easy to read, and it was very very like I said, purposeful on my part to do that. And one of the things that I also wanted to do was I wanted to be a timeless manual, is
Mm-hmm.
because if you think about it, 50 years ago, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder is probably looks the same and manifests the same way it does today, right? I
Yes.
believe 50 years from now, depression is still going to, in many ways, and anxiety, post-traumatic stress, substance addiction is going to show up in very similar patterns.
Mm-hmm.
What can change in time are treatment protocols, maybe even some medications and maybe new innovative ideas of treating things. But the disease itself is going to be the same, as well as family dynamics and so forth and communication patterns. So thank you for, just wanted to recognize that comment and to reinforce that is that I hope that people out there are able to read it in common everyday language, but
Mm-hmm.
also be suited for educators and people well educated in as well. And so I tried to find that nice balance between those different demographics who will potentially be picking up my book. But
Yeah.
in terms of what you were talking about, tough love, and that's another aspect of my book that I was really focused on is clarifying some very well-meaning terminologies or phrases
Mm-hmm.
out there. And because a lot of times family members may interpret it in a way where it becomes counterproductive and dysfunctional. And one of those is you brought up is the concept of tough love. And tough love is something we hear out there a lot. And people get that in support groups. And what I find with a lot of families who end up coming to treatment or coming to me because they struggle is they look at tough love as this concept of I'm done with you. I don't want anything to do with you unless you get help
Mm-hmm.
or sober. And that's very, very um, tough um, approach to someone who's feeling helpless, hopeless, psychotic, even homeless, or even suicidal,
Mm-hmm.
is that they're already drained, so to speak, in many
Yeah.
ways, mentally, physically, spiritually. And to have this perception that there's no help for them out there, they may end up tapping out or giving up on life and whatever that may look like. That's even trying to get sober. It's too late to change, or they end their life. And so it's I call it assertive love. And so assertive love, in contrast to tough love, means that there's a nice balance between rules and relationship. And one of the things I tell family members is you can still come from a very loving place. It's just that we have to change the strategy and we have to be able to come from a loving place, but set some very firm boundaries as well. That's what I try to look at. And I call assertive love this nice balance between rules and relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can have relationship and intimate bond with someone, but there also has to be a level of relationship as well. If you're too high in one or the other, certain outcomes can come. And so if you think about any good relationships or healthy relationships, productive relationships in your life, I can nearly guarantee you there's a nice balance between having intimate, close bonds, but also rules in the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. So important. And when you touched on just the language about how to talk to the person who is going through this substance abuse and when they are in a crisis and you need to set some rules and boundaries, just that they know that you're there to love and support
Mm-hmm.
them. I think a lot of people lose hope. And like
Yep.
you said, it can lead down a dark path. And as coming from a parent, my son went through an addiction as well. And so from a parent perspective, it's a very terrifying feeling to be in
Mm-hmm.
this situation.
Yeah.
And I think for me as well, I would have loved to have this book, a couple years ago. It would have helped me navigate a lot of the feelings I was having, a lot of the ways I was approaching my son,
Yeah.
and, that my unhealthy patterns with him. I was very codependent. I didn't know how to address the situation head on. It was like sidestepping things and having that language and giving them hope at a time when they feel absolutely hopeless is crucial. And so I love the way that your book explained that and
Mm-hmm.
helps people navigate their own feelings
Mm-hmm.
and getting through the tough stuff so that they can address their loved one in a way that's helpful and not harmful.
Yeah. If I can
Um,
make a comment with that too,
yeah,
Krista,
yeah.
if you don't mind. And in the book, I talk about, well, research shows that the perception of having some support system. People fare better than when someone has the belief or perception that they have no support. And
Right.
sometimes, right, let's say, for example, people have the perception that no matter what's happening, even if I have fractured relationship, if worse comes to worse, I need someone, I can pick up the phone, they'll come have my back. And sometimes people don't believe that they do. And whether or not they really
Mm-hmm.
do or not, there's someone there. Just the idea or perception or the seed planted that there is recourse or there's a support system if they need it makes a dramatic difference. And one of the things I really talk about that to really help family members, help the loved ones that are out there who just are refusing help, is you can still plant emotional seeds. And that
Mm-hmm.
emotional seeds are these little messages that you send the person that lets them know we still care about you. We're here for you. When you're ready to change and get help, we are here for you. That can come in the form of a text. That can come in the form of an email. That can come in the form of a voice message. And it's letting them know that when you want to make that choice and change, we are going to be here for you. I had one gentleman who came to treatment and he had mentioned that he was struggling a lot with heroin. And his mother had set a boundary. She no longer allowed him to live in the house, and he was homeless. And she would keep planting these seeds. She kept texting him over and over again. Hey, I love you. I hope you're okay. Hope you're safe. I'm ready here when you're ready to get help. And he literally said that those messages constantly had an effect.
Mm-hmm.
Some days he just was swipe away and use, but he said it was some of the biggest buzzkills when he's getting ready to use. And all of a sudden his mom says, I miss you, I love you. And he said it was a collection of those seeds that when he
Yes.
had some moment of clarity to say, you know what, I have a life out there. If I have people who love me and care about me, I think I'm ready to be done with this unhealthy lifestyle and see what this other lifestyle can offer. And so I just want your listeners to know is those little messages you plant out there and
Mm-hmm.
are really, really impactful. They're not falling on deaf ears. They may feel like it. The people may resist it, but can have some positive effects when you plant those seeds in the right time. They germinate.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's very, very profound. Yeah. And is so true. So true. And I think when you're going through this situation, I mean, for any family member, but as a parent, are so in a place of fear,
Definitely.
everything that surrounds addiction and trying to deal with your loved one, it can be volatile and chaotic and so dysfunctional. And as a parent, you just live in fear, I lived that way for many years, and it's a tough thing to navigate because if you think if I don't help them or if I don't pick up the pieces or
Mhm.
pay the bills or whatever
Yeah.
it is you need to do, that I think, and this is a tough thing to talk about, and like trigger warning for those of you who are triggered by suicide, but it's something that you address in your book. And I think it's one of the biggest fears that parents have. They're
Mhm.
terrified to let the pieces fall, um, and because of what could happen. And I
Mhm.
know that it is a tough thing to deal with, but there's a lot of myths that surround suicide. And we just finished September was Suicide Awareness Month.
Mhm.
And I think it's something that I'd like to talk about and have you
Sure.
explain a few of those myths so that people can navigate that topic a
Okay.
little easier within
Sure.
themselves.
Well, you talk about there's a lot of good stuff there that I'd like
Mm-hmm.
to kind of pick apart and deconstruct a little bit. And so, but for the upfront part of it is that this disease, as if you recall in my book, I personify it as this separate entity. We sometimes think we are our disease, and and then we're not. It doesn't define who we are. Neither does one situation or event or trauma. It is I call it a footnote in our life. But a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
rightfully so, if something's very profound, but how it takes over our whole being, and we become identified and live according to that disease. And so that disease, I personifying mean we give it human attributes, these qualities, is because when we can make something separate and concrete, we can understand it. We can understand its language and patterns. And we would do that for an adversary or opponent or anything like that. When we can make something visual, concrete, and separate than us, then we can understand it more. And so this disease definitely If you recall, I related to like a very old-looking dysfunctional car, and
Mm-hmm.
what's oil and gas is guilt and fear. These emotions
Sure.
are legitimate and valid. They're survival mechanisms. They're data. It's just that these type of emotions, when that they're the high levels and chronic, meaning long-lasting, they can be counterproductive, dysfunctional. And guilt and fear are the two most common emotions that keep families paralyzed. Okay. And
Yes.
so, for example, well, my gosh, for examples of a fear of losing your loved one, you know what? I know my daughter's downstairs drinking alcohol and taking Xanax, but as long as she's not on the street being harmed or trafficked or anything like that, or I know my grandson is in his apartment smoking a great deal of marijuana, not working, not using the money we gave him for college, for um, getting help or going to school. And so they realized, well, as long as he's not being out there using harder drugs or homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that they're still at risk. The longer someone stays in that level of unhealthiness, you put themselves at risk. Like that young daughter example I was giving to you, she can die downstairs from an overdose, right? Or she could put herself in a bad situation. That grandson example that I was giving to you, he could pass away as well or put himself in a harmful situation. It's a lot of families, what they're doing is they're just keeping that disease afloat. And that's exactly
Yeah.
what it wants, is to live in guilt and fear. And so we have to accept the inevitable consequences of untreated mental health or addiction when it's a high level. People end up in hospitals, jail, or they lose their life. And homelessness is temporary. They end up in jail, hospital, or they can lose their life. And
Mm-hmm.
suicide is one of those consequences that can happen. And that's one big reason and barrier to why family members are fearful to take action, is because, and I don't think as a parent, I'm a parent myself, I think one of the biggest fears that every family member validated and agreed with is outliving our children, and that's a huge fear.
Yeah.
Sometimes Mother Nature, human nature, or what have you, doesn't make it go that way, but that's the biggest fear. And so, but however, that fear will prevent us from taking the actual steps, and suicide is definitely one of them. And so there's a lot of myths out there with suicide. For example, one of the major myths I talk about in my book is that people who want to attempt or think about suicide truly want to die. No, one of the biggest things is that they don't really want to die. They just want relief from this intense chronic pain. Pain can be emotional, it could be physical, or what have you. And they believe that ending one's life is the only option left on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big myth. Another big myth is that most people plan it out. They plan it out months in advance, and they have it all their affairs arranged. Now, there are people that do that and so forth, but I believe in the work that I do, those are what we call outliers. Those are the rare percentage. Most people who end up taking their life, I call it the perfect storm. The perfect storm means they could be under the influence of a substance. A recent traumatic event happened. They don't feel like they don't have a support system. They are isolated and alone, and they feel like that is the best option on the table and the only option left for them. And then one
Mm-hmm.
other thing too, I have several of these, and I'll mention this one, but a lot of people don't realize this, but people who survive suicide attempts, whether it be ingesting a certain type of substance or driving the car recklessly somewhere, or even hanging themselves, is those people who survived. They interviewed them, and many mentioned that they had changed their mind at the last minute. And
Mm, wow.
so, and you wonder, sadly, how many of people who were successful actually had a change of heart. And
Mm-hmm.
so, as quickly as people can get into that window, they can, in many ways, get out of that window, so to speak. And I've seen it happen before. And that's why connecting with someone, having a support system, or even someone reaching out to someone, we take suicidality very, very seriously. Some people say, family members, well, they're just using it for manipulation. Like if you don't give me that car, why live anymore? Or you kick me out of the house, I don't want to survive, or I don't, I
Mm-hmm.
may just end my life. And yes, that could be the disease's manipulation, but that person's not well either to even get to that
Yeah.
point of saying that.
Yeah.
And so we take suicidality across the spectrum. very serious. And one last thing with suicidality, just to clarify, suicidality is just broad umbrella. People think
Mm-hmm.
suicidality is the intention and plan for killing oneself. And so people like family members or people who want to help someone say, well, gosh, he doesn't have a gun, or she doesn't, she says she doesn't want to do it, so she's not in threat. But so it could range from on one spectrum, just thinking about not wanting to live and being
Mm-hmm.
reckless, driving fast, having unprotected sex, using needles carelessly, and not being hygienic about it, to someone actually make an attempt. And so, and everyone looks different. Some people work every day and seem happy in families, but inside they want to end their life. We think people who are suicidal have this certain look. They're lonely, they're in dark rooms, they're not eating,
Yeah.
they can't get out of bed, and absolutely not. As we've seen, sadly, there's high profile people, athletes and celebrities and people you think
Mm-hmm.
that no way they would be suicidal, or people that have families and friends, and we don't know what their inner storm is. And so that's why it's very important to ask and talk and acknowledge and have
Mm-hmm.
dialogue with people, because you never know
Yeah.
what's going on with them.
Oh, 100%. That is so true. And one of the myths too that you were talking about in the book was that, and I've heard this so many times from people, is, oh, they're so selfish, they're so
Yeah.
selfish to do that. And how you explained it in the book was, it, it's not even, I mean, it is possible, but it's not really possible to be selfish in that moment. They're not thinking
Yeah.
about doing it out of spite.
Well,
They're in a completely different frame of mind. And
mhm.
that frame of mind does not come
Yeah.
from a selfish place. And that's super important for people to understand because I think it's a barrier
Mhm.
for families to talk about. They have this preconceived notion that don't talk like that. That's just selfish. Or if they hear of someone, they're like, well, what is
Mhm.
selfish person? And that closes down a
Yeah.
conversation,
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly.
So that's a super important part
Well,
as well.
well, it introduces shame. Shame is
Yeah.
this expression of making someone feel humiliated. And
Yeah.
so exactly that is that selfish is coming from a family perspective. I guess I could see that where, you take your life, it's thinking about yourself and not thinking the impact of others. And a lot of times
Right.
that language, believe it or not, is trying to come from a place of love, because families are
Yeah.
just doing anything they can to prevent someone from engaging in that act. And again, you're right. That's from the family perspective, but for the individual perspective, they're like, wow, this is so taboo to talk about. And then they stay in isolation. They feel shamed about
Yes.
talking about it.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. And I do talk about in the book is that the people who I've worked with who are leaning towards really ending their life is they don't believe it's selfish. They actually believe it's unselfish and selfless, is because they truly believe in their unhealthy mind that they're a burden, that people will be
Yes.
better without them, and that this is the only and right choice. And of course,
Yeah.
I know it's very difficult for a lot of people and very pervasive culturally for all of us, but Robin Williams' death was very, very profound. I remember a weekend to 2 weeks of people in all levels of my interactions and therapy was so impactful then, because of course he was a cultural icon, not just in the United States, but all over America. And whether it be it's the Mork and Mindy days for us or parents, to the Goodwill Hunting, to I remember there was one 6-year-old girl. She was 5 or 6 on the news and she was crying. And I'm like, I said, why is she crying? She probably wasn't even born when Robin Williams was um, passed away.
Yeah.
And I found out Aladdin, right? He was the
Ah,
voice of Aladdin.
yes.
And so he was just so
Yeah.
cultivated. And it really highlighted, as sad and unfortunate it was, I do believe there's silver linings. And I don't know if you know who Wayne Brady is. He's the
Yes, I do. Yeah.
comedian. And he openly talked about, after Robin Williams' passing, his own struggles with depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh, but it really highlighted that no one's impervious to
Yes.
suicidality. Here, Robin Williams, you would never think. The last person, he was a cultural icon. He had family, success. He had probably people who admired him. You know, he was probably financially well off. Where would he come with taking his life? And so you just
Yeah.
wonder if he really truly believed at that moment in time. This is me speaking with very limited knowledge of that situation. But I wonder if he believed that that was the only choice left for him. And so we can implant hope to people, right? People, I look
Hmm.
at suicidality or hopelessness as someone in the back of a dark cave, and that light at the end of the tunnel is invisible or very bleak. And we work with them, giving them hope and support along the way to get there. But that's a scary place to be.
Yeah.
And people, like I said, can get out of that dark place. And people, we out there, just simple questions of how are you doing? How can I help you? You look sad. How can I support you? Can be very, very critical and even save lives in some cases.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, we always think the funny people or the people who are bringing us the most laughter are the
Yeah.
happiest. And that's,
Mm,
it's
yeah.
really a misconception, right? It's just
Mhm.
we're thinking what we
Absolutely.
see and it's not always the way it is.
Mhm.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about what are some tips and insights that on how to talk to, I mean, for sure, teenagers or adolescents,
Mhm.
if you think that there might be a substance abuse problem?
Okay.
How do parents and or loved ones address that? What's kind of some
Mhm.
tips on that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm learning through this too. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a
Mm.
10-year-old son. And, sometimes people think, here's another thing. Oh, my God, you're a therapist. You must have this wonderful household and your kids must be, we just be, just frolicking in the grass and laughing and sharing all the time.
Yeah,
And we go through our challenges as well out there,
yeah,
listeners, please. We definitely have our struggles, and
yeah,
yes, we have a skill set or knowledge and so forth, but we're people just like all of you, and we struggle. And of course, as you know, working with a family member is very different than a client, right?
yes, yes.
The way
You're
um,
emotionally connected. It's very
you're
different.
emotionally connected, and that's not always a good thing. It's a good thing for the force, generally speaking. But no, we have a struggle that's just very different on that level when you're intimately intertwined emotionally with
Yeah,
someone. But some of the biggest tips that, especially working with kids and teens, and for the most part, they're not openly expressive. And so when we
right.
ask them questions like, "How are you today?" Fine. How was school? Good. How was practice? Nice. That's it,
It's like
right?
a
And
universal language.
yes, and we asked this very, very um one answer question, right? And
Yeah,
then the door's closed. And so one of the things I encourage family members is to ask open-ended questions, and open-ended questions that lead more to it, like, hey, tell me about the best thing that happened today at school. Tell me about the most challenging thing that happened. Oh, wow. How did you navigate through that? And so asking questions like that. But I think what's really important is planting the seeds to them that you are a safe place. The home is a
right.
safe place. You can come talk to me. Does that mean that they're going to come talk to you out of right then and there? No, but you're planting these seeds. And a lot of times we don't realize it. Sometimes we give these implicit messages that it's not okay about this because they model you. I believe the home is this movie that children observe, and they're
Yeah.
going to replay in many ways that movie. So if we don't talk about emotions, right, that is what they're going to believe is the right way to deal with emotions. If it's not a if we yell at each other, that's what they're going to model and believe. That's the way we communicate with one another. But I think
Hmm.
that's very important is to build rapport with your kids and let them know it's okay to talk. And then what I talk about too was that validation I talked about earlier. That is huge. Where I see a lot of people, especially parents,
Yeah.
is they try to enforce their vision. Well, when I was growing up, well, we didn't have this, and it creates this barrier. And we
Yeah.
validation means to acknowledge their truth. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it or believe it, but you are acknowledging and seeing their truth. And I see that a lot with the internet and gaming. Is these parents say, "Well, my gosh, we don't talk anymore." And and when I grew up, we didn't have phones. We sat at a table, we ate dinner, we laughed, we washed dishes together, we played games. And I'm not saying that that things haven't changed. Absolutely, they have. But sometimes we don't understand their world. And saying like, wow, you really sound connected with a lot of your friends on the Roblox or the game that you play. You know, tell me about it. What is it about it that makes you feel so connected with those people? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have to immerse ourselves in this world, because I believe validation is the precursor to empathy. And
Yeah.
empathy is critically important for building bond, trust, and strengthening relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. So important. And especially there's a lot of parents who they don't have the language, and
Yeah.
so educating themselves. And that's where I love how your book can come into families who are just navigating learning about this stuff.
Mhm.
They don't have to be a crisis situation
Yes.
to get their hands on a manual or something to help them actually just learn language or learn about their own
Mhm.
emotions, their own feelings. I mean, if I'd have had this book like 18 months ago, 2 years ago, it would have helped me navigate a lot.
Thank you.
And I think that when you're when you're in a situation of crisis, it's like thoughts go out the window some days, and you just don't know where to turn. And you're right, there is no pamphlets on this stuff.
Mhm.
Um, there was not a lot of information, and there's not enough people talking about it. And it's one of the reasons why I want to start this podcast, because I felt like I spent my whole life living under this cloud of darkness from childhood trauma and generational substance abuse that had been going on in my family. And then I married into a family that was having these struggles. And then my son, it's like, I mean, we're already 3 generations in, and finally the chains are being broken. And that comes from speaking up and learning
Mhm.
as much as you can before you're ever even in a crisis situation.
Mhm.
Because whether or not parents like to admit it, and as quote normal and healthy as your family is, kids don't have to be in a situation of trauma to fall into substance abuse, or a loved one doesn't have to be in a state of trauma
Exactly.
or grow up in a dysfunctional
Mhm.
home. But unfortunately, that is more the norm than we think it is.
Mhm.
I don't know of a lot of people, I don't know of anyone who hasn't been affected by at least alcohol in some way or another, or on the bigger end, full blown addictions and that
Mhm.
type of thing. So I think your book is crucial for everyone to get their hands on and just
Thank you.
learn how to navigate those feelings. I think one of the big things for me was when my son was in imminent danger and we needed to get him help.
Yeah.
Um, it was like something clicked for me, and I knew that we needed to get him into recovery because he was in crisis and our family was in crisis. It's not just him. We were all going through our own form of crisis. And I think if you can just speak a little bit to early recovery and
Mhm.
what that looks like, because it is still a very crucial time for your
Mhm.
loved one who's suffering from a disease, and
Mhm.
also for family members. It's like
Mhm.
you get your person into a recovery or into a treatment
Yeah.
program, and all of a sudden, oh, yay, all my
Mhm.
problems are solved. And that is
Yeah.
not the case.
Yeah.
So, can you
Yeah.
speak a little bit up on that?
Sure, sure. Again, too, like I said, you're seeing a lot of excellent things, and when someone says something, I just boom, a light flashes, and
Yeah,
I have all these things I want to address real quickly. So if you don't mind, if I kind of
yeah,
precurse,
no,
and when
please
I
do.
come to that, is yes, my book is called "How to Get Your Resisting Loved One to Treatment," and so when people usually um, think of treatment, they think of this formal process. You go into a facility, lockdown facility, there's staff members, there's psychiatrists, there's medications, and so forth. Yeah, that is a form of treatment. But it can also mean that how to get your resisting level to a point of accepting help, right?
Yeah.
And so I was debating when I was making the title that first one um, um, is capturing, but then treatment is also capturing as well. And so I decided
Hmm.
to go, of course, with the treatment part of it. But I want your readers to know out there, and people read the book, it's not so much formal treatment, but it's how to get them to a place where maybe they're in a position where their only option, at least to get support from the family unit or loved ones, is to get help. The
Yeah.
other thing too is treatment can look the same, different across people, right? It's because there are some religions out there, there's some cultures out there that have their own and very effective ways of getting their loved one back on track. And so
Hmm.
treatment does not have to be going to a facility, a residential place. Yes, it can be, and that level of treatment can be very, very effective. I do believe there's certain attributes of certain treatment facilities, such as structure, routine, accountability. There's supervision. There's elements within a treatment program that lend itself to increasing the probability of success. But I want your listeners to know out there is that there are other modalities out there. And the book was originally designed for people who are at a level of crisis meaning that if something doesn't change sooner than later, something very bad or deleterious consequences can
Hmm.
take place where someone can get harmed or killed or be put in a situation where a situation may be irreparable. And so that's one thing I want to mention as well. And so I do believe there's a critical period in this process. Most families that struggle, I call it the pre-treatment phase or the pre-change phase, is that they're out there, they don't believe I have a problem, that everyone else is the problem, they can manage their substances, they're homeless, they're in hospitals, they're in jail, and getting them into what I call the first phase. The first phase of the treatment and recovery process is what I call 30 to 90 days. And that is where most people struggle. They leave treatment, they relapse. And that is the most critical period that we have to do whatever it takes to allow them to start healing. Is because in that time,
Hmm.
either they're getting abstinent from the substance, they're talking about things that they haven't talked about, they're learning new coping skills, and they're even simple basics. They're trying to eat and sleep. And if they need it, they need medication, they need to stabilize. They need to allow those things. And so what happens is it gets very uncomfortable for that person and they bail. They're going to go back to the thing that works, whatever that
Yeah.
substance, relationship, situation is. And what happens with family members is they allow that. They allow that
Hmm.
dynamic to happen. Like people, it doesn't fail that in all the hundreds of families I've worked with that come to me is that we tried everything. We tried everything. And I could pinpoint at least some level of a dynamic that takes place. Well, they've been to 10 treatments and they leave after 30 days. What happens after that? Well, they come home. So where's the motivation for them to stay in treatment,
Yeah.
right? Or they stay sober for, you know, 6 months and all of a sudden they relapse and they relapse for like a month straight. I said, well, what happens? Do you set a boundary? No, and so where's the motivation to maintain sobriety? And
Yeah.
so if you remember in the must knows, when I ask people why their loved one struggles for so long, it's because they can't. On some
Yeah.
level,
Yeah.
that system surrounding them is allowing them to perpetuate these patterns. And
Yeah.
so that's what refer to the early recovery process is, I do believe, and it's lifelong. Recovery is lifelong for everyone.
Hmm.
I believe we're all in some form of recovery. Just recovery is not necessarily a medical condition or a substance. Recovery is just a plan of place for healthier outcomes. So we're all in some of
Yeah.
recovery because we all have our form of a disease of some sort, this entity that causes impairment to our life. So we're all in some recovery process, so to speak. And so I'm glad you bring that up as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. I mean, when we went through this whole process, it took me it took me watching him go through his early recovery to
Yeah.
realize I needed to be in my own recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably just about as ill as he was, in my own
Mm-hmm.
mental game. And that comes from growing up in this sort of home and environment and not addressing the issues and the
Mm-hmm.
patterns of behavior for so many years. And sometimes it does take one person in your family to break the chains for other people to wake up and to start realizing that they too need help and that it's time um, to get their own help. And I have to tell you a little story about the power of breaking generational
Mm-hmm.
addiction. And that is when my son went into recovery and he was ready. I mean, he didn't think he was, but he was ready. And so he stuck with it and he did a wonderful job. And he is currently still in recovery and doing
Wow.
very, very well.
Good.
but and he's about to have a baby. And so
Wow.
this baby will be the first in both sides of the family where that child will not know the disease of addiction in their early years, and that's breaking the chains. But
Yeah.
when my son got into recovery, um, his his grandfather stopped drinking,
Mm.
and he was in his 80s.
Wow.
So that is the power of breaking chains. You know, I mean, there's a lot of support and love in our families, and that was powerful for him
Mhm.
to go out and seek his own recovery.
Mhm.
And, he didn't tell anybody when he was doing it, but
Yeah.
when my son found out, he just, I mean, it makes you so emotional, and
Mhm.
it just is a testament to how powerful
Mhm.
getting your loved one into recovery can be. And it's like healing generations behind you. When
Mhm.
you heal and when you break those chains, you are enabling others to heal and break chains of their own.
Yes.
And that's a powerful thing. So,
That's a powerful story,
yeah.
and it really, really reflects a lot of the vision I had for the book. And because, we know interventions out there. Interventions, on very general speaking, is where we get the family unit and we sit the struggling loved one down and sort of flank them and say, you need to get some help soon. And interventions like that are very helpful, when the
Mm-hmm.
circumstances are there and so forth. What my book came in is we need an intervention on the family unit first,
Yes.
minus the struggling loved one, is because that family unit, there's a saying, the three C's in recovery: you didn't cause it, you can't cure it, you can't control it, but I believe you perpetuate in some form or fashion. And one of my
Right.
biggest saying is, just because you come from a loving place doesn't always mean it's the healthiest or the right place. And so
Yes.
that's where the intervention comes, is because it's an all hand deck approach. Because if that family unit isn't evolving and changing and growing and learning and participating in the breaking that generational change process, your loved one, when they integrate themselves in that system, their chances of long-term success
Mm-hmm.
dramatically decrease. Does that mean they can't be successful? No. But does their probability of long-term success at risk? Absolutely. And so, because, someone can go into treatment for 45 days, 50, 60, 90 days, but if their, for example, spouse or someone else, their family unit or support system isn't healthy, it really, really puts the recovery at risk. And the last thing I want to say, and I've seen this happen so much, we tend
Mm-hmm.
to think that it's a top-down process where we teach people you have to
Yeah.
be older and full of life. And if you really open your mind to lessons out there, you will find it. I
Mm-hmm.
learn from clients every single day. I can learn from a child while seeing a child out in public, or seeing an older person um, maybe navigating through some struggles, or hearing someone interact. And if you really listen, there are learning lessons out there. And I've seen it happen before, because a lot of people in recovery think, well, God, how can I have impact on anyone? Trust me, when you're in treatment, that change in energy, you
Mm.
can assist someone who feels hopeless in treatment. A family member may be thinking about getting healthy themselves. And that story really reflects, particularly, two cases that I came across where this son was in our treatment. He was like 20, and his dad decided, I'm going to stop drinking. And then he continued to stop drinking. And then this other gentleman was there, and his cousin, who was also struggling, says, you know what? My cousin's in treatment. I'm going to go to treatment now so we can come out together and start this recovery process together. So we can all have impact. And people think, well, God, what do I have to offer? How can I impact anyone? I've been messing up all my life. And trust me, just being healthy and moving in a direction, you can be powerful and instill hope to people. They may not tell you, but you could be planting seeds in people. And trust me, people are watching and observing. And I've seen it, the miracles and the gifts of recovery sobriety happen all the time.
Yeah, yeah, that's so powerful and so true. And it also lends to there's no room for blame. When you're in this situation and you're getting your loved one healthy and your family healthy, blame just it makes you go
Mhm.
backwards. we're all in it together. And
Listen.
if one person heals, if 10 people heal in the family. And that's the case in our family. So many people looked at their own behaviors
Mhm.
and decided
Right.
it was time for changes. And
Yeah.
that really supported my son coming back into this environment. I cannot
Exactly.
stress enough how important that is. And uh, I I went through a little bit of a period right at the beginning where I was really fed up. I was fed up with the secrecy and the guilt and the
Mhm.
and not talking about this and how it perpetuates the disease. We cannot heal if it stays silent. And
Exactly.
so it's so important to talk with your family members. It's not about blame. It's not about putting the finger on someone. It is about a collective energy in healing and love and bringing
Mhm.
everyone together, right? That's what heals. So, and I wanted to ask you too, uh, just a take home for people. And I love how your book, you have the take home, the little takeaways.
Thank
So
you.
how
Thank
how
you.
it's broken down was great. And I know the books can be so beneficial to so many people. And
Cheers.
and I have already recommended two people who are struggling currently, a couple
Mhm.
friends with their family members, and I sent them the link to get your book. And I said, look, if this just helps you, this is a huge step in the right direction
Yeah.
in navigating your own stuff. But give me one takeaway that would really help people in navigating this as a final.
Mhm. Yeah, if I have thought.
Yeah.
And yes, and you, that question embodies the whole purpose of the book. And it's actually my must know number one. And
Mm-hmm.
it's to have hope, is
Yes.
because the process, whether it be treatment, really does work. I've worked with most dire cases where someone attempted suicide 48 hours before someone came in, people came into our treatment, psychotic or maybe hallucinations or delusions because they use so much substances, meth, marijuana use, alcohol use, or what have you, to people being hospital and prison, the most dire of cases, and they're able to get healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, have hope because the greater process really works. It's just that the blueprint, the strategies have to be revised and changed because we have to be humble enough to know that our way hasn't been working. And there's, like I said, the family unit has to be equally invested and know what their part is. And so the step-by-steps that I talk about is we have to even vet who are those people going to be in what I call this coalition to get their loved one to those first early phases of recovery, because not everyone's going to be appropriate for that stage, right?
Yeah,
And so
that's
I
right.
believe there's a fleet of people, but not
Mm-hmm.
everyone's going to be in that initial coalition that's going to enter that battle. And so, but have hope, like I said, and people struggling out there, your listeners who are struggling with a substance or trauma like I said, people have gotten better and lived many fulfilling lives. And
Mm-hmm.
there are lots of gifts, endless gifts of sobriety and recovery. And they're out there. You just got to look for them. And so
Yeah,
that'll be my
thank you
biggest
so
take home
much.
message.
Thank you. That is so important. And yeah, definitely have hope. And there's always a light on the other side if you're looking for it. There is. And there's a lot of support out there, a lot more
So,
resources nowadays. And I know that your book is definitely um, a huge resource for people
okay.
to grab a hold of. So, what do you have coming up? What would you like to plug?
Coming up, well, I've been doing, kind of this book tour. I've been
Mm-hmm.
doing Barnes and Noble signings. I'm also doing a lot of different media appearances and podcasts. Those are very much on the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I have some articles, and so if anyone's interested in looking at some of the media stuff, they can go to my website and drbrianlicuanan.com. Or Instagram. I like to do a lot of mental health short videos, and my point is send out impactful, meaningful content out there and messages to really
Mm-hmm.
hopefully change people's minds about what they can do and clear up some of these misconceptions that they may have, and of course destigmatize talking about
Yes.
mental health. I want to give people like yourself, by the way, I want to also mention what you're doing is wonderful.
Thank
And
you.
talking about your own personal experience as a
Hmm.
success story is what hopefully we're all doing out there, is giving people permission to talk about their stuff and to take
Yeah.
away the negative stain of shame and guilt, major barriers for people wanting to get help, and letting them know that it's okay and we struggle just like you and people can get better.
Yes, that's so important. And I also just want to say I noticed on your social media that you involve your younger son in your endeavors, and that is so inspirational to, to it's educational for him and to see other kids, for other kids to see your son participating in what you're doing. And it's a heavy topic, but guess what? It is a family affair, and it's so great to involve young ones
Thank you.
in this process.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, number one, he loves coming with me. He's still at that
yeah.
age that he loves coming there. I know that can change very quickly,
Yeah.
but he loves to come with me. It's a great bonding moment. So he's like my
Yeah.
cameraman. So he
Yeah.
follows me and he takes video. And so that's why it's a little shaky or coming from someone this high. But he's great. And yes, you're absolutely right. And so we started to do one time because we underestimate the insights sometimes as kids have. We just assume you're
Yeah.
young, you're 5 years old. What insight can you share? And we underestimate people's abilities. And one day we were at a book signing afterwards, and we decided to do. I was doing a video out in the just public area, and he said, "Hey, can I do one too?" And then I was amazed of the insight that he had on situations. And so we
Yeah.
started doing a topic and son's version and then dad's version. And it's funny how kids just can talk very uncensored, unadulterated, and it's you get an idea into how they think and behave. And so that's one of the things that I think is helpful for parents and families to know out there, and
Yeah.
in kids, that, hey, they have a voice and they have a very powerful voice, and we have to be able to bring that out of them.
Yeah. And I think it's such a great example of how to stay connected and keep
Mhm,
the lines of communication open with your kids
mhm,
is having them join you, join
mhm,
you in those discussions. And, kids are smart. They pick up on things,
They do.
and there's no sense in keeping it a secret from them, thinking that it's going to influence them. It gives them awareness, and it really brings it out into the open at a time when you want them to continue talking to you.
Exactly.
So that's a great example. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining me. It has absolutely been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we can do this again. I
I would
probably
love
could have
to.
talked another hour with you about other things.
Me too.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Dr. Brian. And I will put everything in the show notes, all the links, so you can get the book and you can contact and get in connected with Dr. Brian. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
To whoever may need this nugget of encouragement, things will be alright, so quit your worrying. I get it, the odds seem stacked back against the wall, but even consider it such.